Welcome everybody to our latest episode of the Future of Work webcast. Thank you very much for being here today. Today we are privileged to have Carrie Desiderio, who I have known for, I would say, almost a decade or more. And she is the VP of HR at HH Global. And today, we're going to be focusing our conversation on the connection between technology and people, and how do we really leverage technology to its utmost when we're working on people processes. So, Carrie, I know it's been a while since we've talked, and lots of changes for you. So maybe tell us a little bit about your role and maybe a little bit about your journey on how you got here to your current role at HH.
Sure. And thanks for having me today. This is a fun conversation. So, really the topic of technology is universal to all of us in business, and it has been in my entire career in human resources and business of any kind. So I've been in the HR department space for over 15 years, recruitment as well as HR operations of all kinds. And, my roles have been blended from on-site with littler companies where you kind of can walk around and see everybody and bump into each other, if you will. And while the computer's utilized for tons of communication and business operations, the relationships are right there, smack dab in front of you. But that's kind of become a thing of the past in recent roles, where I've been in the environments with my staff spread out across different states. So whether it's healthcare or manufacturing or marketing companies that I've been with, the more recent trend has been the majority of my team members are not right smack dab in front of me. In fact, the vast majority are in different states and countries. So in the last 5 to 7 years alone, I've interacted with over 20 countries in terms of day-to-day dealings, from recruitment to HR operations. And that has changed the climate of the working environment tremendously. And it's not unique to HR. This is a business conversation. We're in a global world. And so how you can harness the power of technology and connectivity the right way becomes really critical.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to me that notion of working across time zones and with different countries and having conference calls where it's midnight for someone.
Sure.
And how do we make sure that we are caring for the people that we're working with and our clients in an environment where it definitely is and feels like it's 24/7 and where we have to make sure we're thinking about and intentional about our usage of technology in all of these people processes.
Yeah.
So I know we've talked a little bit about this whole notion of connecting technology and people. And so I'm curious how you feel like you can intentionally create processes like talent acquisition that really leverage the very best of both the kind of technology and human capability.
Sure. And yeah, it spans from the TA moment, bringing them in, talent acquisition, to onboarding, to day-to-day management, right? So I'm a huge fan of technology. In fact, the businesses I've been in recently would be impossible without it. But there's always that line of, okay, where does the tech take us? And at what point do we say, okay, now it's time for an in-person meeting? Or sometimes even, especially with the blended generational groups, teaching some of the younger generations that there's actually still a time to not use tech and to pick up the phone or something like that, right? So from the recruitment perspective, it would be impossible for me in recent positions to have led recruiting without tech. There's the applicant tracking system, there's the LinkedIn connection, there's utilizing job boards of many shapes and sizes and types across countries, some large and known, some smaller niche ones to different countries. And so tech is huge, just to be able to populate the resumes and do keyword searches so I can have my recruiters take 10,000 CVs or resumes and hone in on 5 that they actually want to call. It's also great for screening and automation tools. So We've used that for, asking questions to screen out the resumes before they get to us, or to have maybe a paragraph or two so you can decide if it's even worth a phone call just based on certain utilization of language and skills. But then there's a point where to get a real feel for a person, this is before you get them in the door, that conversation, that eye contact, that tone of voice, that assessing of skills that takes a more human touch has to involve human interaction. So it's a blend. Without it, impossible to do business. With only tech, impossible to do business. And that same concept leads through to onboarding and operations. And I think it becomes even more critical when it gets to managing teams. But I mean, onboarding, for example, huge fan of learning management systems. We've got fabulous, online trainings with my current and prior companies, all buttoned up in a great learning management system. And that's great for tech skills, for compliance, for utilizing intranets and electronic databases and communities, for connecting people, seeing faces, knowing who's who, sharing org charts, all of that. But there comes a point where when you need to learn your technical skills, and this is universal to any role, not just HR, but all forms of operations, you need that buddy. You need that in-person time. You need that emotional connection, And I often draw analogy to think about when you're raising kids, and maybe it's a contemporary topic for me because I just had a little baby girl, and she was born with a heart case, and she's doing really well. But part of her healing process was spending time in the NICU after her surgery and being with her through her healing. And they told me that human interaction, that touch, that talking to her, that process of human emotion and all those elements made a difference in how she developed and whether she was going to thrive, which she's thriving. And yes, maybe a little baby is a little bit different, but humans still don't completely change. And there are more and more studies showing how we are psychologically stronger people. We are able to form ideas and brainstorm in a much better fashion when we have in-person contact and we have people and we have that connection. So for me, it's using the tech to automate everything you can to be efficient and to connect people across teams, but then knowing, okay, now it's time for a team meeting. Okay, now it's time for you to have a buddy that you get with in person to learn this, because learning is both a relational, emotional experience as well as, a cognitive and skill experience, and some things you just can't learn over the screen. So for me, it's kind of using your gut to a certain extent and being intuitive, but it's always a blend.
Interesting. It's so first of all, congratulations on your little one being so healthy. It's awesome.
Yes, thank you.
And so it makes me think about, as you're looking at these processes, is there a decision point at which you're kind of intentionally saying, we've gotten up to this point, and so now I need to be able to see, touch, feel, hear, look across the table from that person? Is there some intentionality around that decision as you're kind of building out these processes?
For sure. And it depends on the industry you're in. So I've played in different spaces. In some industries, it's more natural because you have a group of people that will work together in one geography pretty consistently. And so you try to find those connection points. Where it gets to be more of an opportunity area where you can really think outside the box is when you have teams spread out. So it's becoming a very common global model, especially with large companies, to have teams that are part of one team spread out in different countries, in different states, in different office buildings, and sometimes with massive buildings. This can even happen in the context of one big organization that maybe has 7,000 people at that location, and it's just hard to, walk across the bridge or whatever. So the intentionality is when it comes to checking in with people and seeing how they're doing day to day and how they're learning and operating. So I always encourage my managers to have in-person touch points, ideally as much as possible or every single week if they can, if they're in the similar geography. If they're not and they're across, space, at least make sure you're turning on the camera, at least make sure you're planning some in-person meetings, maybe over the quarter or over the year, depending on how frequently you need to interact. But there are different degrees of it. So it can be in person, it can be camera. Email's different, right, from telephone, which is different from camera, which is different from in person. So for me, it's more about how are they doing, what works for the person, and that constant feedback concept that I think is a universal best practice management. Are you checking with your people to see how they're doing, feeling, and how they're operating? And even asking people. So if they're coming along and they're training and they need some extra support, ask them, how are you feeling? Do you need some extra opportunity and training? And they'd be willing to set up that in-person opportunity.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great insight. And it makes me think about, as we're kind of looking at this idea of the war for talent, and in some instances where we have so much scarcity of talent, I'm wondering, in your past experiences, and maybe even in your current one, should we be thinking about talent differently as we're kind of looking out in the future of work? Is that a concept that we should be maybe thinking about differently, or changing our sort of connotation around talent?
I mean, there's always this question of how is technology disrupting talent, and how are some jobs being replaced with artificial intelligence and automation? So that's a conversation that obviously comes into play here. If there are some things that can be automated, what do they look like? But I think the opportunity area to keep this really positive becomes, how does AI and how does automation help us become people who can think better and spend our time in more strategic spaces so that you're building more business? So that changes the conversation a bit from, oh my goodness, my job might go away due to tech, to no. Tech can become a partner in getting better at what I do, creating new business and new space for the future. So for me, I think in the talent space, it's helping our people be innovative to think about tomorrow. So if today, and I'll use a manufacturing example because I spent years in manufacturing. So if today my job is on the manufacturing floor, and my job is to take this widget and combine widgets and put them in a bag and seal that bag, okay, great. So that's a job I've been doing for 20 years. But maybe tech of tomorrow is going to create a robot that can do that. Obviously, it already is. But my job maybe would be automated in that sense. But a person who's been doing that type of activity for a long time may have some ideas on how to position the future technology, how to create ideas around what that tech could do, could come up with ways to scale and get new business and have more opportunities for efficiencies to be able to set up warehouse operations. And, it's an analogy that I suppose is only applicable to manufacturing, but in any business environment as well. So if it's my recruiting team, if you can automate the talent acquisition screening process, that's great, because now you can free up time to work in talent management and to work in HR operations to become better and to invest in our talent, which then drives better people, better innovations, new business. And so, those are two extremes, from simplistic manufacturing shop floor to, being an HR partner that can help with ideation globally. But nonetheless, the concepts have some similar parallels in that if you use tech as your friend and your ally, and you are an innovator, you're going to actually create more for yourself in the business. So for me, this conversation of being based in fear about having jobs be irrelevant is something we want to get ahead of and not let that lead, but rather have a conversation around how technology creates new, better jobs in a better world, and how it can actually make our lives better and our careers more exciting.
Yeah, that's really great insight. So a couple of things that makes me think about, I had a conversation with a former colleague, Tony Bond from Great Place to Work, and he talked about this idea of technology allowing humans to be more human. So instead of that individual putting widget A with widget B into the bag, they now can think about how can I make that widget better, or how can I make
Yeah.
the packaging more effective, or different usages for the widget. So that's one thing I think that you,
Mm-hmm.
I love that notion. It's sort of the balance between, do I think the future of work is Hal and the Terminator, or do I think it's the Jetsons? The other thing that it makes me think about is when I was working for Comcast, and how automation really allowed those call center agents to shift from being almost order takers to being real customer service uh, agents, solving problems and really creating relationships with their
Yeah.
customers. So it's a really powerful place to sort of think about as we're exploring what does talent mean in this kind of new world of work, or the future of work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the more that we learn about how humans operate, it almost seems counterintuitive to say that technology can make you more human, but it's actually accurate, because if technology carves out efficiencies to make your job easier to do, then that makes space and time for more relationships that can help you create strategic space and create new future work. And there's more and more psychology that's really showing that the in-person time, whether it's face-to-face, I mean, there's tons of study around human touch and how that, it changes how people interact. Touch points can be all different kinds. There's physical touch, there's in-person communication, there's just being able to talk and encourage each other. And all these things can create a very healthy environment, and leads into all kinds of physiological and psychological benefits. And when we're healthier and we're happier, we're better people, and we're contributing and we're doing more exciting things. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy. When we begin to invest more in not just the essentials of running a business, but the human components of being people, that frees our brain space and our interactions to kind of go up that ladder to something really cool and different. So if tech can be used efficiently, and we can carve out more time for us to be in person with one another, we become healthier, more productive people who think of things we wouldn't have thought of alone in our little box before.
That's awesome. That's an awesome way to think about it. And I love the notion of really leveraging technology to sort of be more human, and to accelerate our ability to be innovative and creative, and all those sorts of things. And it really makes me think about this idea of, as we're kind of marching down this future of work, that one of the things that we face in our organizations is this sort of breakneck speed of change. And
Mm-hmm.
so is there something around our leveraging technology that might be able to help us cope with that level of change that's occurring now in our organizations and our industries?
Well, yeah, definitely technology creates a very fast pace of human learning, of how we see innovations, and the amount of knowledge in the world doubles, triples, quadruples, and exponentially changes. The more technology we have, the more knowledge there is. It's no longer back in the day 100 plus years ago, or whatever period of time. All the knowledge you'll ever be exposed to is probably housed in a few Sunday newspapers. I mean, the stats are staggering. So at what point does that become overwhelming for the human brain, right? When you think of a computer that's going to be smarter than fleets of people. So again, I think it's around more of the positivity and how you look at this. If technology is leveraged to make our lives better, to cure diseases, to make our world more efficient, to make our driving safer, to do all these wonderful things, fantastic. But I think in the human space, it's still allowing yourself to be human and having, there's a lot more focus now on mindfulness, on meditation, on whole and healthy eating and exercise and all of that. I've even learned that recently in my own health journey, just making sure you take time to go out there in that dead quiet space. If you're on the coast, go to the ocean. If it's a nice day and you're near a forest, go walk in the forest. For me, that unplugging and being in totally dead space with nature has taught me that you have to know when enough is enough. Appreciate the tech, appreciate what it does to change our world, to save our lives, to do these amazing things. Again, going back to my daughter's story, without modern tech, without cardiologists and surgeons that are best in class, and tech also gets you there, because without tools to see her heart, they wouldn't have detected a hole that would have killed her. So technology saved Hannah, and that's fantastic. And in similar form, it's changing our lives. But for it not to consume us and even destroy us, we have to know when we're not a computer. Our mind is not a machine. And so I think this is going to drive a movement for more mindfulness and simplicity. I already see it in our world today. And I think that's crucial that we understand that as we want to have a healthy, whole organization with our people. So taking a break, having that quiet space, learning how to kind of bake in that blend of innovation, fast-paced work, using tech to drive tomorrow with, okay, we're still human beings, and we still need to have what human beings need, which is quiet and sometimes isolation and maybe just time one-on-one with somebody.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I know that, those unintended consequences of kind of surrounding ourselves with technology can be a loss of connection or I don't know what the opposite of mindfulness is, but whatever the opposite of that is. So, right, there's those, when you think about how you utilize technology in your organization or in organizations of the past, are there any other sort of unintended consequences that occur as we're sort of leveraging technology more and more?
For me, the number one as an HR practitioner is when we remove the components of communication that are the loudest in human interaction. So body language and facial cues are humongous. And so one of the things I focus, especially with those who are younger that come through my teams that grew up without any comprehension of this, to be honest with you, I have to teach them the criticality and the importance of a phone call, of turning on the camera, of the in-person, and really teach them that an email or a text or an instant message cannot convey everything that the human brain needs to experience for this to be a healthy relationship. So it's easier for me, Anil, to sit down with you in person over a cup of coffee, relate to you, and then deliver some really hard feedback after I've done all those things. And if my tone of voice is positive and I'm not, mean and negative and critical, and you can just feel that energy is there to be supportive, yet I'm dealing you a punch, you can actually swallow that. Versus I have seen time and time again where electronic without those components can be a jab, and it might be a minor criticism in an email or a text or a message that really would be nothing if we had a relationship, right? And so people can get really bent out of shape when they erase everything that's meant to be part of human relationship and replace it with a two-line, improper spelling, all this stuff, right? So that's the biggest pitfall for me. So it's fantastic because we can be efficient, knock stuff out. Emails are marvelous, but when we begin to deal with conflict management, personal development, team building, and we're replacing it with emails and texts, it's dangerous waters.
Yeah, boy, that's awesome insight, because you can even kind of think about your personal relationships. I mean, I know that my wife can give me the toughest feedback, but because I know she's coming from a place that she cares, and I can see her giving me the feedback, it's much more palatable to be able to get that and to take action on it. So I think that's so powerful, and it makes me think about when you're rolling out or teaching people how to deliver feedback or to have tough conversations or mitigate or manage conflict, do you feel like that is a skill that we need to really double down on now that technology's become so much more pervasive?
Absolutely. And I can, automate the tech steps of how to set a goal for a team member, how to perform, some sort of performance management task and document things. So I can do a video on how to do a year-end review. I can do a video on the basics of different compliance things or systems and trainings, how to do an expense item for reimbursement. I can use tech for the how-tos of transactional activities, but when that technology video replaces the nuances of conflict management, relationship management, anything too complex that you really need to get a feel for that has no prescribed black and white step-by-step how to do, you have to be really careful that you do double down and that you don't just send a video to teach, so I've used a lot of videos, and there are a lot of good videos for soft skill development, but I've learned that when we use that, it's just kind of like a Band-Aid, or it's a legalistic response to our, request from the powers that be above us to make sure our teams get this training. When we automate that, disaster unleashed. So it's okay to use a little tutorial that maybe breaks down the principles of conflict management and the 5 steps. Perfect. But then follow up and say, hey, I wanted to follow up on that video you watched. Let's talk through how you might be able to use that and what situations do you have with your current teams, and let's maybe even role play and do a mock session and how you're going to be able to use those principles to go and deal with so-and-so on your team's situation in a positive way that gets results. And so tech's good, but it's not the end-all be-all when it comes to things that require human relationship.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and it makes me think about, so that as we think about how we're leveraging our learning management systems and the plethora of tutorials on YouTube or Harvard Manage Mentor or whatever it is that you're looking at, right? There's all kinds of things out there, but I think, as you and I were talking about earlier, we're probably contemporaries, and I remember my first leadership development course was in the basement of the Discover Financial Services building with 15 of my closest friends that we spent 3 days doing role playing. And it was painful.
Yeah.
But I have to say that it gave me a foundation of knowledge and ability and practice that you just can't get as you're kind of watching a video, because practicing by yourself is not nearly as effective. And I think one of the things that I've noticed as I look at and talk to other organizations is what you were talking about, that idea of feedback and conflict resolution and really being able to share difficult messages, that all of those things need to be trained at a much higher level as we are having generations come into the office that have had less and less exposure to that.
Yeah, and teaching this becomes more and more challenging when we do have a world that is becoming more dependent in technology and less dependent in the human relationships, where people can have 2,000 friends in social media, but those aren't real friends. It's better to have 3 real friends. And I'm thinking of my first really effective training where I was dealt a few blows in terms of things I needed to work on. The training that really got me, that I'll never forget, was about 10 years ago when I was working for a Fortune healthcare company, and they believed in this stuff to the point where they made anyone who managed a certain level of staff or human resources people go on a retreat of sorts, and it was expensive, and we had to fly, and I went to California, and we had multiple days, and they had actually had 360s run on us, but we were not going to be able to see those 360s until the appointed hour had arrived. And the appointed hour was after we had formed a team with a guided instructor who really understood how to influence human change and how to teach leaders to be transparent, real leaders. And after we had heard stories and been given examples, and we had learned the principles of management attached to the values of the organization. And on top of all of that, just to clear our minds and prepare us, we were told to, go stretch ourselves and do something that we had never done before. And in my case, I went out, to do horseback riding in this kind of scary place where I thought I could fly off the hills. But anyway, it was a fun experience. But they challenged us to do something you haven't done before. Some people, I think, have tattoos. And it was really interesting because here they spent all this time. And the appointed hour was only delivered the punches. So, we're going to really take the 360s. We have a good tool. And we're going to have you look in the mirror, but now you're ready to look in the mirror because we've taught you the principles of management where change is good, being human's okay, we all have flaws, and it's about a continuous improvement environment and stretching yourself and being transparent because when you tell your people, I have flaws and here's how I'm working on it, so we're going to work on that together and we're going to work on you now, you build trust and you move forward. And so they would not let us see our 360s until we had all of those elements in place with a good follow-up cohort too. And then we were ready emotionally to go out there and be better people. And I've had plenty of different, performance reviews and personality assessments, 360s. I've seen a whole bunch, but that one changed me. That one prepared me to be able to understand who I am and accept it instead of, receiving feedback in a way that was detached or not emotive or negative, because change is positive. Negative feedback can be turned into a positive real fast, right? Kind of the question of is performance improvement plan always designed to fire somebody? No, it's really designed to make somebody successful. So it's all about messaging. And so that particular retreat that week taught me so many principles that I've carried with me, and I don't always model it to excellence. And the tech world sometimes works against that. I'm like, oh no, I've got to go back to in-person. Right? But then I always remember that experience. And that's one of the things that just creates that foundation for me of, okay, that's what good looks like. And there is no tech in the world that can replace that in-person human experience. And that flows through to everything.
Yeah. Wow. What a great experience. And this idea of how do we ensure that we're connecting ourselves to this learning is really powerful. So one last question I'm really curious about, because given your sort of varied experience and your grounding really in how to leverage technology to its fullest and connect that to the human experience, I'm curious about, so as you're thinking about the next thing that you're going to really integrate technology and people, right? What do you feel like is the next big area of focus, particularly as we think about the sort of people experience, employee experience resources?
There are a few different ways I could go with that. I think when it comes to analytics, that's powerful. So data analytics is a hot topic for a reason. And being able to utilize tech to look at trends and patterns to drive decisions that are intelligent decisions for the future, whether it's using that in the marketing space or using it in the HR space as we go and we get an idea about future climates and make human capital decisions, or whether it's the HR space, there's a whole bunch, looking at turnover trends, doing analytics on patterns of the past, getting ahead of what's going to happen in the future. But any industry can utilize this sort of process. And so the more that our tech becomes sophisticated with data and analytics, I've just recently moved from using Excel to using Excel with PowerPoint to using the new Power BI. And it's a little bit cooler way of looking at data, creating charts and graphs. There's a whole bunch of it I haven't tapped by any stretch, but we just moved from, the Excel charts and the PowerPoint to let's use Power BI. And so I think one of the huge opportunities in the future is going to be using technological tools that can help us make predictive analytic based decisions to drive everything. I mean, there's no area of business or science or anything that's untouched by this. And so for me, that's exciting. And when I go and I look at human capital planning or, training, just to know that I can begin to look at patterns of excellence and use data to help us drive decisions is something that I think is part of the future.
That's awesome. And that whole notion of being able to be a data whisperer and understanding
Mm-hmm.
what are the questions that I want to ask,
Yeah.
so very vital. So one follow up to that. So as you're leveraging this data, are you thinking about, I want to use this data to connect to driving business results and organizational goals, in addition
Mm-hmm.
to doing sort of the right thing for our employees and our and the communities that we serve?
Oh, absolutely. It permeates everything. It permeates your relationship with the client. It permeates how you help the client get the best results from you. It permeates how you improve your offerings today to make tomorrow better and stronger. It permeates how you can get into new spaces in the client's area. So even going out and getting new business, if you know your market and you know what's going on in the market, if you can use data analytics and trends, that's fantastic. When it comes to marketing and advertising, you can use data and analytics to figure out where to go after new business and how to appeal to your customers. So much of that's outside of my standard HR space, but data is data. And so whether it's understanding my location of future new hires by analyzing hiring trends over the last years in different states and countries, or understanding how I need to modify my salary brackets by using data through surveys and statistics to derive those decisions, or whether it's helping me drive future new sales with my clients, it's still the same. So I'm seeing, and I'm seeing more and more people in their resumes are getting some of these data and analytics certifications, and for good reason, because those that have those minds are the future innovators, and they're typically going to be some of the best people to have in the business.
Wow, it's great. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for your time and your insights. This has been exceptionally valuable.
A pleasure. Nice to catch up with you today and have a fun chat.
Thank you very much, Carrie. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Emil. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey there. Thanks, Carrie Desiderio, the VP of HR Americas for HH Global, for your valuable time. Great insight. Thank you so much for connecting with us to talk about how we can really merge people and technology to win in our organizations. My name is Anil Saxena. I am your humble master of ceremonies here on the Future of Work webcast for ChangeNerd. I look forward to the next time that we're together. You can send me comments or concerns or questions or just topics that you'd be interested in learning a little bit more about, either here on ChangeNerd, on LinkedIn, or you can go to www.cube214.com. That's my website. I am the president, chief cook and bottle washer of Cube 214 Consulting. We're an organizational change, organizational effectiveness, and employee experience consulting firm. Thanks again, and I look forward to our next conversation. Have a great rest of your day.